We are now going to look at the feature section of this site, which is the piece at the top with the large text and the large image, so this bit here. And this is fairly straightforward. All we're really going to need to do is create a row here and add two columns, and probably the hardest part here will be cutting out the image, although if it's been provided to you with the tutorial, it wouldn't matter. You can just go ahead and include it. So we'll be looking at this basic feature here. We'll add a bit of spacing where it's required. We'll go ahead and create this whole area with a specific class so we can target the elements like the massive text here. So let's go ahead and look first of all at what we need to do in terms of the folder, because we need a way to store images here. So we're going to basically create a new folder inside of our root directory of our website. I'm going to call this image. So you can see that's popped up in Sublime here. I can now start to include images here that I need. So for those of you using Photoshop, let's just go ahead and look up how we might cut this particular graphic out. So we can see here that in our right hand menu we've got the different parts of the site which we can toggle on and off. And in this case, if we take a look at this, you can see that the slider here is what we need to look at. So you can see that that's the slider. So we've got the MacBook graphic here that we can see here. We've also got the background here as a rectangle. So basically all I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this. I'm going to go ahead and select what I want to crop to, basically. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say crop within our menu at the top. So that's cropped that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say trim. And what this will do is it will trim based on basically what you tell it. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And you can see here that's trim. Now there's a little bit of shadow here that you probably can't quite see, and that's why this is a little bit larger than you'd expect. You might expect it to come up to the edges of the MacBook here, but in actual fact this is fine. So I'm not going to go ahead and save this out. I've already got a copy of this, but if you were to go ahead and save this out, you would have, let's just scroll back up to this, you would basically have something that looks like the following. So I've got this graphic here, and that's basically just called laptop. So that's the graphic. We've got a transparent background here. It doesn't look transparent just because of the way this works, but we've basically got this transparent image, and we're going to go ahead and apply this to the page. So let's now take a look at the markup and what markup we might need to use to actually build this. So we just basically need a row here with different columns in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a div element, and I'm going to give this a class of row, and I'm going to give this a class of feature. So we'll use the feature class to target certain elements within this feature. So now what we need to do is go ahead and create the columns. So let's go ahead and do this now. So in the design we've got a 6 and 6, but I'm going to go ahead and create this as a 5 and a 7, because I just want this to naturally flow nicely. I don't want to have to worry about creating too many styles to space things out. So I'm going to call this left, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new column, and I'm going to call this large 7, or give this a class of large 7, and this is on the right. So over in our browser now we've got this. So we've got the left and the right. This is where the MacBook image is going to be. This is where the text is going to be. So let's go ahead and create this as a H1. It doesn't have to be an H1. It can be any element. In fact, H1 is usually used for some kind of header, which technically it is. And I'm just going to type make things happen with a full stop. Now, as it stands, that's the default, so that's absolutely not what we need. We want this to be giant, and we want it to have white text. So let's go ahead and start to style up this H1. So what I want to do is create a separate section in here that styles the feature. So I'm just going to go ahead and create more comments here. And this is going to be called feature. So the feature itself, what do we want to add styling to? Well, let's just take a look at this and see if we just undo down here, if we just go ahead and toggle that back on. So the spacing underneath this needs to be increased, because at the moment, if we check out our design, it's not quite large enough. So what I'm going to do is, for the feature, I'm just going to say margin top 20 pixels, just to give that a little bit of extra spacing. When I refresh, we have a little bit of extra spacing. So if we take a look at this feature here, you can see that the margin top is 20 pixels extra. Okay, so now to focus on this H1 here, let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to say feature H1. And what I'm now going to do is apply various different styles to basically make this look as close to what we have on the design as possible. And I'm going to carry on using Open Sans. I'm not going to go ahead and create, bring in a new font for this. I'm just going to go ahead and continue to use Open Sans. So I'm going to say font size 5.5 ems. That's going to make it significantly bigger. There we are. And that's also forced that to go on to down to a line, but we could of course have put a line break in here, or some kind of wrapping or something like that. So I'm going to set the color to just white. So that's just made that white, nothing too special. Let's just pull this just out of the way a little bit more. So that's nothing special. You've probably already noticed that we've got a massive amount of line height between these items. We'll go ahead and fix that in just a moment. But let's go ahead and change the text transform to uppercase. So that's going to force this to be uppercase text. Perfect. Semantically, if we were to go ahead and change this to make things happen, that's incorrect. What we want to do is presentationally, if we want something to be capitalized, we go ahead and use CSS to do that. We don't add that in our markup because it just looks like shouty text with this all uppercase. So what we're now going to do is also change the font weight, which is quite important because this is quite a bold piece of text. So there we go. We've got a lot more boldness in there now. And now we're going to go ahead and adjust the line height. Now that we've done the width, the weight of the text, the size, and everything like that, we can go ahead and adjust the line height. So I'm going to do this within the browser just so I can get this perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create the line height property in here. And let's go ahead and give this a pixel value, and let's just choose a value. I've just chosen 40 pixels, but obviously that's too short or too small. So I'm going to just increase that until I'm happy with how this sits. So I think 70 is probably a good amount. So we can go ahead and we can say line height 70 pixels. Now what I'm also going to do is add a margin bottom onto this H1. You might be thinking, why do I need to do that? There's nothing, immediately underneath it. Why would you need to space it out? Well, when we actually pull this inwards, in fact, we haven't actually looked at the responsive nature of this now, but you can now see that, this, looks okay. The H1 here needs a margin underneath because the laptop then will have spacing underneath it to look okay. We actually also need to go back and modify the header or the logo, because this is exactly the same deal. The header or the logo is squashed up to this text here. Let's just go ahead and make these changes now. So I'm going to go ahead and add a margin bottom to this of 40 pixels, and let's just refresh. So right then will come down. There we go. So if the laptop's sitting here, it's now got enough space. And with the logo as well, we also need to change this. So let's go ahead and head up to the logo here, and we'll go ahead and set a margin bottom on this to 20 pixels. Okay, so because it's an anchor, we need to go ahead and set a display type of block. And there we are. So if we go ahead and pull that out, it looks normal and everything looks fine. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can actually go ahead and we've got this text right, we can go ahead and introduce this laptop image. Now, the way I've done this means that this image will, not stretch, but look quite nice in terms of this container because I've chosen a larger container. It has a bit more room to breathe. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and set a source and an alt, and I'm just going to say laptop. Or, in fact, we don't really need an alt. For a screen reader, if we leave it blank, it's going to ignore it. Let's just go ahead and set the alt to nothing, just so screen readers ignore that, because we shouldn't really have to have that read out. There's not really much need. So remember, images are stored within my image directory, and this is laptop.png. So laptop.png, and we can go ahead and refresh now, and there it is. So there's the laptop image. So in terms of the actual feature itself, adding that wasn't too difficult. All we really needed to do was add a row, 2 columns, introduce an H1 and increase the text size, the color, the line height to make it look like this design or more like this design. And then we've just gone ahead and introduced the cutout laptop image into there as a little image on there. So the responsiveness of this, let's just double check. So if we pull this down, the text comes in, and obviously the laptop naturally increases and decreases in width as you pull this in and out. So that's the feature part of the website that we've done. We're now going to move on to the 3 pieces here that we're going to go ahead and build next in more or less the same way, using grids, and then going in and giving this a class name and targeting different elements within these 3 areas differently.